Sometimes life strips away everything you thought you couldn't live without, leaving you standing at a stranger's gate with nothing but hope. That's exactly where Clara Whitmore found herself on a dusty Wyoming morning in 1873, her bare feet bloodied and her pride long since buried with her husband. She had walked for days to reach Eli Dawson's ranch, carrying only a small bundle and the desperate words that would change both their lives forever. Eli was a gentle cowboy who had learned to live with loneliness after losing his own family to violence. When Clara begged to work his land in exchange for shelter, he saw something in her eyes that reminded him of his own pain. He agreed to let her stay, but only if she kept her distance. Neither of them expected that working side by side would slowly heal the wounds they both carried. But as Clara proved her strength with each passing day, dangerous men began circling the ranch like wolves. What they didn't know was that Eli was hiding something that could either save them both or destroy their chance at happiness. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered ranch gate as Clara Whitmore stood trembling in the Wyoming dust. Her feet, bare and bleeding from the 3-day walk, left crimson prints on the dry earth. In her arms, she clutched a small cloth bundle that remained of her former life. Inside lay her wedding ring, a faded photograph of her late husband Thomas, and his silver pocket watch. These precious remnants were the only proof that she had once been more than the desperate woman now begging for work. Eli Dawson emerged from the barn, his weathered hands still gripping a pitchfork. At 35, he carried himself with the quiet strength of a man who had learned to live with solitude. His dark hair showed early streaks of silver, and his blue eyes held the kind of weariness that comes from too much loss. He had been mucking stalls when he heard her voice broken and pleading carrying across the morning air. "Please, sir," Clara repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can work. I know animals. I can cook, clean, mend. I just need shelter." Eli studied her face, seeing past the grime and exhaustion to the pride that still flickered in her green eyes. She was perhaps 28, with auburn hair that had once been carefully pinned but now hung loose around her shoulders. Her dress, though torn and stained, had been quality fabric blue calico with tiny white flowers. She had been a proper woman once, someone with a home and a husband, and a life that made sense. "Where did you come from?" he asked, his voice gentle but cautious. "Nebraska," Clara said, swallowing hard. "My husband died of fever last spring, lost the farm to creditors, lost everything." She lifted her chin slightly. "But I'm not looking for charity. I'll work for my keep." Eli felt something twist in his chest. He recognized the look in her eyes, the same hollow desperation he had seen in his own reflection 3 years ago. The same proud stubbornness that had kept him going when everything else had fallen apart. "You know anything about cattle?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Raised them with my Thomas for 6 years. Know horses too. Can birth a calf. Treat sick animals. Handle branding." Eli nodded slowly. He had been managing the ranch alone since his family died, and while he preferred solitude, the work was getting harder. His spread wasn't large, just enough cattle to make a living and a small herd of horses he was particularly proud of. But it was honest work, and it kept him busy enough to avoid thinking too much about what he had lost. "I've got a small cabin out back," he said finally. "Used to be for hired hands. It's not much, but it's got a roof and a stove." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "Thank you. I need to be clear about something," Eli said, his voice growing firmer. "I keep to myself. I don't make conversation just to hear my own voice. You do your work, I'll do mine. We'll get along fine that way." "I understand," Clara said, though something in her expression suggested she saw through his gruff exterior. Eli led her across the yard, past the main house where he lived alone. The cabin sat 50 yards away, small but sturdy. He pushed open the door, and Clara stepped inside. It was sparsy, single room with a narrow bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a small stove. But it was clean, and after sleeping under stars for 3 nights, it looked like a palace. "There's a well out back," Eli said. "Help yourself to water. I'll bring you some clothes that might belong to my wife." Clara's breath caught. "I couldn't. She's been gone 3 years," Eli said quietly. "No point in them just sitting in a trunk." That evening, Clara sat at the small table in her cabin, carefully unpacking her bundle. She held the photograph of Thomas up to the lamplight, studying his kind face. He had been a good man, gentle and hard-working, but the fever had taken him so quickly. The debts he had hidden from her money, borrowed against future harvests that never came, had destroyed everything they had built together. She placed the photograph on the table, then slipped the wedding ring onto her finger. It felt strange after months of keeping it hidden, but somehow appropriate. She was still Thomas's wife, even if she was starting a new life. Through the thin walls, she could hear Eli moving around in his house. He had brought her bread and beans for supper, along with a dress and apron that had belonged to his wife. The dress was a simple brown cotton, well made but worn soft with age. It fit reasonably well, though it was clear his wife had been taller and more slender. Clara wondered what had happened to Thamiz's wife and the children he had mentioned briefly. The way he spoke of them, the careful distance he maintained, suggested tragedy. She recognized the signs because she carried her own grief like a stone in her chest. The next morning, Clara rose before dawn and made her way to the barn. Eli was already there, milking the cow. He looked up as she entered, surprised to see her so early. "Thought you might want to sleep in," he said. "I'm not accustomed to sleeping past sunrise," Clara replied. "What needs doing?" For the next hour, Eli showed her around the property. He had 40 head of cattle, a dozen horses, chickens, 2 pigs, and the milk cow. The work was familiar to Clara, and she found herself relaxing for the first time in months as she fell into the rhythm of ranch life. "You weren't lying about knowing animals," Eli observed as he watched her gentle way with the horses. "My father was a horseman," Clara said, stroking the nose of a bay mare. "Said I had the touch for it." As the days passed, Clara proved her worth. She rose early, worked hard, and asked for nothing beyond what she needed. Eli found himself watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, noting the way she hummed while she worked, the careful way she tended to injured animals, the quiet dignity she maintained despite her circumstances. The nearest town, Clearwater, was a 3-hour ride away. Eli made the trip once a week for supplies, and on Clara's second week, he asked if she wanted to come along. She hesitated, then nodded. She needed to introduce herself to the community, to establish her place in this new world. Clearwater was a typical frontier Tona Main Street, lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, a church, and a handful of houses. As they drove the wagon down the dusty street, Clara noticed people stopping to stare. By the time they reached the general store, a small crowd had gathered. "Eli Dawson," called out Henry Morrison, the store owner. "Been wondering when you'd show up, and who might this young lady be?" "Clara Whitmore," Eli said simply. "She's working my ranch." Clara felt the weight of curious eyes upon her. She knew what they were thinking. A woman alone with a man, living on his property. In a small town like this, such arrangements were cause for speculation. "Mrs. Whitmore," said a woman with graying hair and kind eyes. "I'm Ruth Morrison, Henry's wife. Welcome to Clearwater." "Thank you," Clara said, grateful for the warmth in the woman's voice. As they shopped for supplies, Clara noticed how the townspeople treated Eli. They were respectful but distant, as if he were a puzzle they couldn't quite solve. She gathered that he had lived in the area for several years, but had never fully integrated into the community. His grief, whatever had caused it, had built walls around him. On the ride back to the ranch, Clara ventured a question. "You've lived here long?" "5 years, Eli said. "Came here after." He paused, then shook his head. "After my life fell apart elsewhere." Clara nodded, understanding that some stories took time to tell. She had her own secrets, her own shame about the debts and the desperate months that had followed Thomas's death. Some wounds needed to heal before they could be shared. That evening, as she sat in her cabin darning one of Eli's shirts, Clara allowed herself to feel something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. It was fragile, like a small flame that might be extinguished by the slightest wind, but it was there. She had work, shelter, and the beginning of respect from a good man. It wasn't the life she had planned, but it was a life worth living. Outside, she could hear Eli chopping wood for the winter stores. The steady rhythm of his axe was somehow comforting, a sound that spoke of preparation and permanence. For the first time since Thomas's death, Clara began to believe that she might have found a place where she could rebuild not just her circumstances, but her sense of self. Hidden in Eli's house, tucked away in the bottom drawer of his desk, lay a cracked daguerreotype of a woman and 2 children. The woman was beautiful, with dark hair and a gentle smile. The children, a boy and a girl, were perhaps 6 and 8 years old. Their faces were bright with life and innocence, captured in a moment of happiness that now seemed like a dream. Eli hadn't looked at the photograph in months. It hurt too much to see what he had lost, to remember what it felt like to be a husband and father. But tonight, as he listened to Clara moving around in her cabin, he found himself thinking about the picture, about the family he had failed to protect, and the guilt that had driven him to this isolated place where he could hurt no one else. He didn't know it yet, but Clara's arrival would force him to confront not just his past, but his future. And she would discover that some secrets, like some wounds, could only be healed by facing them together. Clara had been working the ranch for 3 weeks when she found the letters. She was cleaning Eli's house, a task he had reluctantly agreed to, after she pointed out that it would save him time to focus on the livestock. She was dusting his desk when she noticed the corner of an envelope sticking out from beneath some old newspapers. The letter was addressed to Eli Dawson, but the return address made her blood run cold. Hendricks Land Development Company. She knew that name. Every farmer and rancher in Nebraska knew that name. Marcus Hendricks was the man who had been buying up land across the territory, consolidating small farms into vast holdings. The man whose lawyers had come calling on desperate families like vultures circling wounded prey. Clara's hands trembled as she read the letter. It was dated 2 weeks ago, and the language was coldly formal but unmistakably threatening. Hendricks was offering to buy Eli's ranch for a fraction of its value, citing irregularities in the land deed that could be resolved through a quick sale. The letter suggested that refusal to sell would result in legal action that could prove costly and time-consuming. She found 3 more letters beneath the first, each one escalating in tone. The most recent, dated just 5 days ago, was signed by Marcus Hendricks himself. It mentioned valuable water rights and suggested that Eli's claim to the land might not be as secure as he believed. Clara set the letters down with shaking hands. She had seen this before: the systematic targeting of independent landowners, the legal harassment disguised as legitimate business. It was how she and Thomas had lost their farm, though they had been too naive to recognize the pattern until it was too late. The sound of boots on the porch made her jump. She quickly shoved the letters back under the newspapers and grabbed her dust cloth, pretending to clean the nearby bookshelf. Eli entered, removing his hat and hanging it on the peg by the door. "How's the house coming along?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Clara turned to face him, studying his weathered features. Now that she knew what to look for, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when he thought no one was watching. "Eli," she said quietly, "are you in some kind of trouble?" His eyes sharpened. "What do you mean?" "I saw the letters. From Hendricks Land Development." She watched his face change, saw the walls go up. "I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to pry. I was just cleaning and—" "You had no right to read my mail," Eli said, his voice cold. "You're right," Clara said. "I didn't. But I recognized the name and I was worried about you. Worried about me, or worried about your situation here." The words stung, but Clara forced herself to remain calm. "Both, if I'm being honest, but mostly worried about you." Eli walked to the window, staring out at the pasture where his cattle grazed. Marcus Hendricks wants my land. He's been pressuring me to sell for months. Are you going to? No. The word came out flat and final. This is my home. I won't be driven off by some greedy businessman. Clara moved closer, her voice gentle. Eli, I've seen what Hendricks does to people. He has lawyers, money, connections. He doesn't just make offers, destroys anyone who stands in his way. You sound like you speak from experience. Clara was quiet for a long moment. Thomas and I borrowed money against our farm during the bad drought year. We thought we could make it back when the rains came. But Hendricks bought our debt from the bank, then called it in early. When we couldn't pay, he foreclosed, said it was just business. Eli turned to look at her, seeing the pain in her eyes. I'm sorry. I didn't know. We fought him in court, but he had better lawyers. We lost everything, the farm, the house, even most of our personal belongings. Thomas died believing he had failed me. And now you're here, working for a man who's being targeted by the same person. Clara met his gaze steadily. Yes, and I'm not running away again. That evening, Clara sat at her small table, writing a letter by lamplight. She had been thinking about the situation all day, trying to remember details from her own legal battle with Hendricks. She wrote to her sister Mary in Nebraska, asking for any information about recent court cases involving Hendricks' land development. She also wrote to the Territorial Land Office, requesting copies of any documents related to Eli's property. If Hendricks was claiming irregularities in the deed, she wanted to understand the nature of his challenge. As she sealed the letters, Clara heard a knock at her door. She opened it to find Eli standing on her doorstep, his hat in his hands. I wanted to apologize, he said. I was harsh with you earlier. You were trying to help, and I don't handle help very well. You don't need to apologize, Clara said. May I ask you something? He nodded. Why is this land so important to you? Important enough to fight Marcus Hendricks for it? Eli was quiet for a long moment. It's where my family is buried, he said finally. My wife Sarah and my children, Emma and James, they died in a range war back in Colorado. I brought them here, to this place, because it was peaceful, because I thought nothing bad could touch them here. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I'm so sorry. This land is all I have left of them. Their graves are up on the hill behind the house. I visit them every morning. He looked at her with something like desperation. I can't let him take them away from me again. He won't, Clara said firmly. We won't let him. We? If you'll have me as a partner in this fight, yes. I know his tactics. I know how he operates. Eli studied her face in the lamplight. Why would you risk everything for a man you barely know? Because running away didn't work the first time, Clara said. Because some things are worth fighting for. And because. She paused, then spoke the truth. Because I'm tired of feeling powerless. The next morning, Clara rode into Clearwater to mail her letters. As she was leaving the post office, she nearly collided with a man in an expensive suit. He was tall and well-dressed, with silver hair and cold grey eyes. She knew instinctively who he was before he spoke. Mrs. Whitmore, isn't it? Marcus Hendricks said, his voice smooth as silk. I heard you were working for Eli Dawson. Yes, sir, Clara said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Admirable of you to help a struggling rancher, though I wonder if you realize how precarious his situation has become. I'm not sure I know what you mean. Hendricks smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Dawson's land claim is questionable. There are irregularities in the original deed that could prove quite costly to resolve. I've offered to purchase the property at a fair price, but he seems reluctant to be reasonable. Perhaps he doesn't want to sell. Perhaps. But want and necessity are different things, Mrs. Whitmore. I'd hate to see you caught in the middle of an unfortunate legal situation. Clara felt anger rising in her chest. Are you threatening me, Mr. Hendricks? Not at all. I'm simply pointing out that wise people sometimes need to make difficult choices. Good day, Mrs. Whitmore. As Hendricks walked away, Clara felt the same cold fear she had experienced in Nebraska. The man radiated power and ruthlessness, and she had no doubt that he would destroy anyone who stood in his way. But this time, she wasn't going to run. When she returned to the ranch, she found Eli in the barn, repairing a bridle. She told him about her encounter with Hendricks and watched his face darken with each word. "He's escalating," Eli said. "Next, he'll start pressuring the townspeople, trying to isolate us." "Then we need to move faster," Clara said. "We need to find out exactly what his claim is based on, and we need to build our own support." Our own support. The other ranchers in the area, they'll be next if Hendricks succeeds with you. We need to make them understand that this isn't just about your land, it's about all of them. Eli looked at her with something like admiration. "You've thought this through." "I've had 3 weeks to think about it. And I've been through this before, remember?" That night, they sat at Eli's kitchen table, planning their strategy. Clara had found the official land deed papers in Eli's desk, and they studied them carefully by lamplight. The deed appeared to be in order, but Clara knew that wouldn't stop Hendricks from finding something to challenge. "The key is the water rights," Clara said, pointing to a section of the document. "Your land controls access to Silver Creek, which feeds the whole valley. That's what he really wants." "Then that's what we'll fight for," Eli said. As they worked, Clara became aware of the intimacy of the moment. The two of them bent over the papers, their hands occasionally brushing as they pointed to different sections. She found herself stealing glances at Eli's profile, noting the way the lamplight caught the silver in his hair. "Clara," he said suddenly, "I need you to understand something. If we do this, if we fight him, he'll come after you too. He'll dig into your past, try to use your husband's debts against you. He'll make your life hell." Clara looked at him steadily. "My life has been hell for the past year. At least this way, I'll be fighting back." Eli reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I haven't had anyone stand with me in a long time." The touch of his hand sent warmth through Clara's body, and she realized that somewhere in the past 3 weeks, her feelings for Eli had shifted from gratitude to something deeper. She was falling for this quiet, wounded man who had given her refuge when she had nowhere else to go. "We'll face this together," she said, squeezing his hand. Neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows beyond the window, or the way the watcher melted back into the darkness when their conversation ended. Marcus Hendricks had not become successful by leaving things to chance. He was a man who believed in gathering information about his enemies, and he had learned long ago that knowledge was the most powerful weapon of all. The battle for Eli's ranch was about to begin in earnest, and Clara was about to discover that her connection to the land dispute went deeper than she had ever imagined. Clara's sewing kit had seen better days. The worn leather case, cracked and softened by years of use, held needles that had been her mother's and thread that she had carefully conserved through the lean months after Thomas's death. But as she sat in Eli's kitchen that evening, mending a tear in his work shirt, the familiar ritual brought her a sense of peace she hadn't felt in months. "You don't need to do that," Eli said, watching her work from across the table. "I can manage." "This tear will get worse if it's not properly mended," Clara replied, her fingers working the needle with practiced precision. "Besides, I like to keep my hands busy." Eli had brought her into the main house after their conversation about Marcus Hendricks, claiming that they needed to work together more closely if they were going to fight the land challenge. But Clara suspected it was more than that. She had noticed the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, the way he seemed to relax when she was near. "Where did you learn to sew like that?" he asked. "My mother. She insisted that a woman should be able to create beauty even in the hardest circumstances." Clara smiled at the memory. She used to say that mending was a form of hope-taking something broken and making it whole again. "Sounds like a wise woman." "She was. She died when I was 19, just before I married Thomas." Clara's voice grew soft. "I think she would have liked you." Eli felt something warm spread through his chest at those words. "Tell me about your life before Thomas died." Clara's hands stilled for a moment, then resumed their work. "We had a good life, small farm, but we were happy. Thomas was a gentleman, quiet like you. We were trying to have children, but," she shrugged, "it wasn't to be." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. We had 6 good years together. That's more than some people get. She looked up at him. What about you? What was your life like before you came here? Eli was quiet for a long moment. I was a sheriff in a town called Millfield in Colorado. Sarah was a schoolteacher. We had Emma and James, and I thought I was the luckiest man alive. What happened to them? Range war. Two big ranchers fighting over grazing rights, and the town got caught in the middle. I tried to keep the peace, but... He shook his head. Sarah and the children were coming home from church when the shooting started. Wrong place at the wrong time. Clara set down her sewing and reached across the table to cover his hand with hers. That wasn't your fault. I was supposed to protect them. That was my job, to keep people safe. You can't protect everyone from everything, Eli. Trust me, I've learned that lesson. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, Clara's hand still covering his. Finally, she picked up her sewing again, but the mood between them had shifted. The barriers that Eli had built around his heart were beginning to crack. Over the next few days, Clara threw herself into the work of preparing for their legal battle. She had received a response from her sister Mary, who reported that Hendricks had been involved in at least a dozen land disputes across Nebraska and Colorado. His pattern was always the same: find a technical flaw in the deed, apply legal pressure, and buy the land at a fraction of its value when the owners couldn't afford to fight. Clara also discovered that Eli had been holding back information about the ranch's value. While going through his papers, she found correspondence with a cattle buyer who had offered premium prices for Eli's herd. The ranch was more profitable than she had realized, which explained why Hendricks was so determined to acquire it. "You've been underselling yourself," she told Eli as they worked side by side in the barn. "This place is worth 3 times what Hendricks offered." "Money isn't everything," Eli replied, but Clara could see the pride in his eyes. "No, but it gives us options. We can afford to hire our own lawyer if necessary." As they worked, Clara found herself watching Eli's hand, strong and capable, gentle with the animals. She had begun to notice things about him that went beyond their partnership in fighting Hendricks. The way he hummed while he worked, the careful way he spoke to the horses, the small acts of kindness he showed without thinking. One morning, she found him on the hill behind the house, standing before 3 simple wooden crosses. The graves were well tended, with wildflowers planted around them. Clara approached quietly, not wanting to intrude on his private moment. "I come here every morning," Eli said without turning around. "Tell them about the day ahead. Ask their forgiveness for the things I couldn't do." "They don't need your forgiveness," Clara said softly. "They need your peace." "I don't know how to find that." "Maybe it's not something you find. Maybe it's something you build, one day at a time." That afternoon, Clara was hanging laundry when she heard horses approaching. She looked up to see 3 men riding toward the house, their faces hard and unfriendly. She recognized the type hired guns, the kind of men who solved problems with violence rather than words. "Mrs. Whitmore," the leader called out as they drew near. "We're looking for Mr. Dawson." "He's not here," Clara said, though she could see Eli working in the far pasture. "That's a shame. We have a message for him from Mr. Hendricks." "I can give him a message." The man smiled, but it was cold and predatory. "Mr. Hendricks wants him to know that his offer won't be available much longer. Sometimes accidents happen to people who are too stubborn to listen to reason." Clara felt her heart rate increase, but she kept her voice steady. "I'll be sure to tell him." "You do that. And Mrs. Whitmore, you might want to consider whether this is really your fight. A woman alone can find herself in a dangerous situation." After the men rode away, Clara found herself shaking. She had dealt with Hendricks' lawyers before, but this was different. This was a direct threat of violence. Eli appeared at her side, having seen the riders from the pasture. "What did they want?" "To deliver a message from Hendricks. They're escalating to intimidation." "Did they threaten you?" "In a roundabout way, yes." Eli's jaw tightened. "I won't have you put in danger because of my problems." "Our problems," Clara corrected, "and I'm not going anywhere." That evening, Clara sat at her small table, writing another letter. This one was to the territorial marshal, reporting the threats they had received. She had learned from her previous experience that documentation was important in legal battles. As she wrote, she found herself thinking about the changes in her life over the past month. She had arrived at Eli's ranch as a desperate widow with nothing to lose. Now she was fighting for something that mattered, working alongside a man who had come to mean more to her than she had expected. She looked down at her hands, noting the calluses that had formed from ranch work. Her nails were short and practical now, her skin tanned from the sun. She was becoming someone different, stronger, more purposeful. The woman who had begged for work at Eli's gate was still there, but she was transforming into someone who could stand and fight. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Eli standing outside, holding a small wooden box. "I made this for you," he said almost shyly, "for your sewing things." Clara took the box, running her fingers over the smooth wood. It was beautifully crafted, with dovetail joints and a fitted lid. Inside, there were small compartments for different types of thread and needles. "It's beautiful," she said, genuinely moved. "Thank you. I noticed your old case was falling apart. This must have taken you hours to make. I like working with my hands. It helps me think." Clara looked up at him, seeing something in his eyes that made her heart flutter. "Would you like to come in? I have coffee." Eli hesitated, then nodded. It was the first time he had been inside her cabin since the day she arrived. As he looked around the small space, he noticed how she had made it her own. Her few possessions were arranged with care, and she had picked wildflowers for the table. "You've made it a home," he said. "I've had practice making the best of small spaces." They sat at the table, drinking coffee and talking about their plans for the ranch. As the evening wore on, Clara found herself sharing stories about her childhood, her dreams for the future. Eli listened with the kind of attention that made her feel truly heard. "I always wanted to travel," she said. "See the ocean, visit big cities. Thomas used to say we'd do it someday when the farm was established. Do you still want those things?" Clara considered the question. "I thought I did, but now I think I want something different. I want to build something lasting, something that matters." "Something like what?" "A life," she said simply. "A real life, not just surviving from day to day." Eli reached across the table and touched her hand. "I haven't thought about building a life in 3 years. I've just been existing. And now I'm starting to remember what it felt like to hope for something." As the night deepened, they found themselves talking about their fears, their regrets, their tentative dreams for the future. Clara shared her guilt about moving forward after Thomas's death, her fear that loving again would be a betrayal of his memory. "Love isn't finite," Eli said gently. "Caring for someone new doesn't diminish what you had before." "Is that what you tell yourself?" "It's what I'm trying to learn." When Eli finally left her cabin, Clara sat for a long time holding the wooden sewing box. It was more than a practical gift. It was a symbol of care, of someone taking the time to notice her needs and create something beautiful for her. She opened her old leather case and began transferring her sewing supplies to the new box. As she did, she thought about what her mother had said about mending being a form of hope. Perhaps that was what she and Eli were doing, taking their broken pieces and slowly, carefully, mending them into something whole. Outside, she could hear the night sounds of the ranch cattle settling for the night, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of wind through the grass. It was a peaceful sound, but Clara knew that the peace was fragile. Marcus Hendricks wasn't going to give up easily, and the real battle was just beginning. But for the first time in months, Clara felt ready to fight. She had found something worth protecting and someone worth fighting alongside. The desperate woman who had arrived at Eli's gate was still there, but she was transforming into someone stronger, someone who could stand her ground and refuse to be moved. The sewing box sat on her table, catching the lamplight, a reminder that even broken things could be made beautiful again, with patience, skill, and love. Clara discovered the carved wooden horse by accident while looking for extra blankets in Eli's house. She had opened what she thought was a linen closet and found instead a small room that served as his workshop. Wood shavings covered the floor, and hand tools hung neatly on the walls. On a shelf near the window sat a collection of carved animals, horses, cattle, even a small owleach, one crafted with extraordinary detail and care. But it was the little horse that caught her attention. Unlike the others, this one showed signs of handling, its smooth surface polished by countless touches. It was painted in soft browns and whites, with a tiny saddle and bridle carved in perfect miniature. Clara picked it up, feeling the weight of love that had gone into its creation. "That was James's favorite," Eli said from the doorway, making her jump. "I'm sorry," Clara said, quickly setting the horse back on the shelf. "I was looking for blankets and got curious." "It's all right." Eli stepped into the room, his eyes on the wooden horse. "I made it for his 6th birthday. He carried it everywhere, to bed, to meals, even to church. Sarah used to say it was practically glued to his hand." Clara felt her heart ache for the pain in his voice. "You're very talented. It was just a hobby, something I did in the evenings after work." He picked up the horse, turning it over in his hands. "I used to dream about teaching him to carve, passing down the skill. He would have loved that." Eli was quiet for a moment, then carefully placed the horse back on its shelf. "I haven't carved anything since they died. Couldn't see the point. Maybe someday you will again." "Maybe." He looked at her with something that might have been hope. "The blankets are in the bedroom closet. I'll show you." As they walked through the house, Clara noticed details she had missed before. The furniture was well made but sparse, as if Eli had kept only what was necessary and nothing that might remind him of better times. But in his workshop, surrounded by his creations, she had glimpsed the man he used to be someone who found joy in creating beautiful things, who dreamed of sharing his gifts with his children. That afternoon, while Eli was checking the cattle in the far pasture, Clara received an unexpected visitor. Ruth Morrison from town arrived in her buggy, bringing fresh bread and a warm smile. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," Ruth said as Clara invited her in for coffee. "I wanted to see how you were settling in." "That's very kind of you," Clara said, grateful for the company. "I don't get to town very often." "Eli keeps to himself, doesn't he? Always has, since he arrived. We've tried to include him in community events, but he politely declines. He's been through a great deal of loss." Ruth nodded sympathetically. "Henry and I figured as much. A man doesn't carry that kind of sadness without reason." She studied Clara's face. "And what about you, dear? How are you managing?" Clara found herself opening up to Ruth in a way she hadn't expected. There was something about the older woman's gentle manner that invited confidences. She shared her story, the loss of her husband, the farm, the desperate journey that had brought her to Eli's ranch. "You've been through your own trials," Ruth said softly, "but you seem to be finding your footing here." "I am. Eli's been good to me, fair and respectful." "And is it more than that?" The question was asked gently, without judgment, but it made Clara's cheeks warm. "I don't know. Maybe. It's complicated. The best things usually are." Ruth reached across the table and patted Clara's hand. "Take your time, dear. Hearts need to heal before they can love again." After Ruth left, Clara found herself thinking about the conversation. Was she falling in love with Eli? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She had loved Thomas with the passionate certainty of youth, but what she was beginning to feel for Eli was different, deeper, more mature, built on mutual respect and shared struggle. That evening, Eli asked her to join him for dinner in the main house. It had become their custom over the past week, sharing the evening meal and discussing their plans for dealing with Hendrix. But tonight felt different, more intimate somehow. Clara had taken extra care with her appearance, pinning her hair up and wearing the blue dress Eli had given her. She had even found some wildflowers to brighten the table. When Eli saw her, something shifted in his expression. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you." Clara felt suddenly shy, like a girl receiving her first compliment. Over dinner, they talked about the ranch, about Clara's conversation with Ruth, about their shared memories. As the evening wore on, Clara noticed that Eli seemed more relaxed than usual, his guard lowered. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told her as they cleared the dishes, "about building something lasting. What about it?" "I haven't built anything in 3 years. I've just been maintaining what was already here, keeping things from falling apart. But maybe it's time to start thinking about the future again." "What kind of future?" Eli was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "A future that includes more than just survival. Maybe expanding the herd, improving the house, building something worth passing on." "That sounds wonderful. I couldn't do it alone." Clara felt her pulse quicken. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that having you here has changed things for me. I'm starting to remember what it feels like to hope again." They were standing close now, the dishes forgotten. Clara could see the uncertainty in Eli's eyes, the fear of opening his heart again. She understood that fear because she felt it too. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I never thought I could feel this way about someone again." "Neither did I." Eli reached up and touched her face gently, his thumb tracing her cheek. Clara leaned into his touch, feeling something inside her chest unfurl like a flower in spring. "We don't have to rush anything," he said softly. "We have time." But even as he spoke, they both knew that time was something they might not have. Marcus Hendricks was not a patient man, and his threats were escalating. The peaceful life they were beginning to envision together was balanced on a knife's edge. The next morning brought news that confirmed their fears. Eli returned from town with word that Hendricks had filed a formal legal challenge to the ranch's deed. The case would be heard by the territorial judge in 3 weeks. "He's moving faster than I expected," Clara said as they reviewed the legal papers. "He's trying to force a quick resolution before we can mount a proper defense. Then we need to work faster too." Clara had been corresponding with a lawyer in Cheyenne who specialized in land disputes. His response arrived that afternoon, and it contained both good news and bad. The good news was that Eli's deed appeared to be legitimate and properly filed. The bad news was that Hendricks had found a technical issue with the water rights documentation that could be problematic. The original surveyor made an error in the boundary description, Clara explained to Eli. "It's minor, but it's enough for Hendricks to claim that the water rights are in dispute." "Can we fix it?" "Maybe. We need to find the original surveyor's notes and prove that the error was clerical, not substantive." They spent the next few days researching, riding to the territorial land office, and poring over dusty records. Clara proved to have a talent for legal research, her methodical mind well suited to tracing through bureaucratic documents. On their 3rd day of research, they made a breakthrough. Clara found a letter from the original surveyor acknowledging the error and providing a corrected description. It was exactly what they needed to prove their case. "This should be enough," she said, excitement in her voice. "With this letter and the supporting documentation, we can prove that Hendricks' challenge is baseless." "You did it," Eli said, looking at her with admiration. "You found the answer." "We did it," Clara corrected. "We're partners in this." That night, as they celebrated their legal victory with a bottle of wine Clara had bought in town, the tension between them finally came to a head. They were sitting on the porch, watching the stars, when Eli turned to her with serious eyes. "Clara, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, both precious and terrifying. Clara felt her heart skip a beat. "I love you too," she whispered. When Eli kissed her, it was gentle and tentative at first, then deeper as Clara responded. She felt something break open inside her chest, a wall she had built around her heart crumbling away. This was different from what she had felt for Thomas, not less, but different. More mature, built on shared struggle and mutual respect. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "I don't want to dishonor Thomas's memory," Clara said. "You're not. You're honoring the part of him that wanted you to be happy." "Are you sure about this? About us?" "I'm sure that I don't want to waste another day being afraid to live." As they sat together on the porch, Clara's head on Eli's shoulder, she felt a peace she hadn't known since before Thomas's illness. She was falling in love again, and it felt like coming home. But even in her happiness, she couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles with Marcus Hendricks were far from over. Men like him didn't give up easily, and they had a way of finding new angles of attack when their first efforts failed. Inside the house, on the shelf in Eli's workshop, the carved wooden horse seemed to catch the moonlight streaming through the window. It was a reminder of love and loss, of the precious nature of the time we have with the people we care about. Clara and Eli were building something beautiful together, but they were building it in the shadow of an approaching storm, and neither of them knew just how personal that storm was about to become. The water rights certificate was exactly where it should have been, filed properly in the Territorial Land Office, signed and sealed according to law. Clara ran her finger along the official document, feeling both relief and growing unease. The certificate clearly established Eli's legal claim to Silver Creek and its tributaries, which meant Marcus Hendricks' challenge should fail in court. "This proves everything," she said to Eli, as they sat in the land office clerk's dusty office. "Your claim to the water rights is ironclad." But Eli frowned as he studied the document. "If our case is so strong, why does Hendricks seem so confident? He's not a man who takes losing bets." Clara had been wondering the same thing. In her experience with Hendricks, he didn't pursue legal challenges unless he was certain of victory. The fact that he had moved forward despite the clear documentation suggested he knew something they didn't. "We need to dig deeper," she said. "There's something we're missing." They spent the rest of the day reviewing every document related to the ranch's ownership history. By evening, they had uncovered a troubling pattern. 3 other ranches in the area had been forced to sell to Hendricks in the past 2 years, all involving disputes over water rights. In each case, the ranchers had possessed seemingly valid claims that were somehow invalidated in court. "He's done this before," Clara said as they rode back to the ranch. "Same tactics, same results. Which means he has a strategy we haven't figured out yet." That night, they sat at Eli's kitchen table, surrounded by papers and maps, trying to understand Hendricks' game. Clara had borrowed additional documents from the land office, and as she spread them out, a pattern began to emerge. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a surveyor's map from 1869. "All of these ranches share water sources that connect to Silver Creek. If Hendricks controls the water, he controls the entire valley." Eli studied the map, his expression grim. "It's not just about my land. He's trying to build a water monopoly." "Exactly. And if he succeeds, every rancher in the area will be forced to pay him for water access or sell their land." The implications were staggering. Hendricks wasn't just a land speculator, he was attempting to control the most valuable resource in the territory. No wonder he was willing to fight so hard for Eli's ranch. "We need to warn the other ranchers," Clara said. "They need to understand what's at stake. Most of them won't believe it until it's too late. People don't want to see trouble coming." Clara gathered the papers into neat stacks, her mind racing. "Then we need proof they can't ignore. We need to document his pattern and show them what happened to the ranches he's already taken." Over the next few days, Clara threw herself into research with single-minded determination. She rode to neighboring ranches, interviewing the families who had sold to Hendricks. What she discovered made her blood run cold. Each family told a similar story. First came the legal challenge to their water rights, based on technical irregularities in old surveys. Then came the expensive court battles they couldn't afford to fight. Finally came the economic pressure banks calling in loans, suppliers refusing credit, mysterious problems with livestock and equipment. "He doesn't just beat people in court," Clara told Eli after visiting the third displaced family. "He destroys them economically until they have no choice but to sell. Which means we're not just fighting a legal battle, we're fighting for our survival." That evening, as Clara sat at her small table writing letters to document what she had learned, she heard horses approaching. Through her window, she saw 3 riders silhouetted against the setting sun. Her heart sank as she recognized Marcus Hendricks himself, flanked by 2 of his men. She quickly hid her papers and stepped outside to meet them, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "Mrs. Whitmore," Hendricks said, touching the brim of his hat in mock courtesy. "I hope I'm not disturbing your evening." "What do you want, Mr. Hendricks?" "I wanted to have a conversation with you, woman to woman, about your situation here." Clara felt anger flare in her chest. "My situation is none of your concern. On the contrary, I'm very concerned about you. You're an intelligent woman who's gotten caught up in a losing cause." Hendricks dismounted, moving closer to her. "Mr. Dawson's legal position is weaker than he's led you to believe. I've seen the documents. His claim is legitimate." Hendricks smiled coldly. "Documents can be reinterpreted, especially when a case goes before the right judge with the right arguments." The threat was clear, though carefully veiled. Clara realized that Hendricks wasn't just confident about winning, he had the process rigged. "Are you trying to bribe me to leave?" she asked. "I'm trying to save you from making a mistake that will ruin your life. Again." The word "again" hung in the air like a slap. Clara felt her stomach drop. "What do you mean by that?" "I know about your husband's debts, Mrs. Whitmore. I know about the farm you lost in Nebraska. I even know about the money Thomas borrowed, that you never knew about money he borrowed from my associates." Clara's world tilted. "That's not true, isn't it? $500 borrowed against a future harvest that never came. Thomas was desperate to save the farm, desperate enough to deal with men he shouldn't have trusted." Hendricks reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper. "His signature, his agreement to pay with interest. When he died, the debt transferred to you. Legally, you still owe that money." Clara stared at the document with shaking hands. Thomas's signature was unmistakable, as was the amount and terms. Her husband had borrowed money from Hendricks's network and hidden it from her. "This is why you lost the farm, Mrs. Whitmore. Not because of drought or bad luck, but because your husband made a deal with devils." "You're lying." "I have copies of all the documents if you'd like to review them. The point is, you've been running from this debt for over a year. But debts have a way of following people, especially when they surface in legal proceedings." The threat was clear. If Clara continued to fight alongside Eli, Hendricks would expose Thomas's hidden debt and use it to destroy what little reputation she had rebuilt. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. "I want you to leave tonight. Pack your things and disappear before this gets uglier than it needs to be. And if I don't, then everyone in the territory will know that Thomas Whitmore was a liar and a cheat, and that his widow is just as untrustworthy. You'll never work again, never be accepted in any community. You'll be truly alone this time." After Hendricks left, Clara sat on her cabin steps, feeling like the ground had fallen away beneath her feet. The document in her hands proved that everything she thought she knew about her marriage, about Thomas, about the reasons for their downfall, had been built on lies. Thomas had borrowed money and hidden it from her. He had made deals with dangerous men and let her believe their problems were caused by drought and bad luck. The man she had mourned as an honest farmer had been desperate enough to compromise his principles and risk their future. When Eli found her there an hour later, still staring at the document, she looked up at him with hollow eyes. "He's been lying to me," she said, "about the farm, about why we lost everything. Thomas borrowed money from Hendricks' people and never told me." Eli sat beside her, reading the document over her shoulder. His jaw tightened as he took in the implications. "This doesn't change anything," he said finally. "It changes everything. Hendricks can use this to destroy my reputation, to make me a liability to you. I don't care what Thomas did or didn't do. I care about you." Clara looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Don't you see? I can't fight him. If I stay and help you, he'll ruin both of us. If you leave, you'll be running for the rest of your life. Maybe that's what I deserve." Eli took her hands in his, forcing her to look at him. "Clara, listen to me. Thomas made a mistake, a desperate man's mistake. That doesn't make you responsible for it. But it makes me vulnerable. Then we'll face that vulnerability together." As they sat together in the growing darkness, Clara felt the weight of an impossible choice. She could stay and fight alongside the man she was learning to love, risking both their futures. Or she could run again, protecting Eli by sacrificing her own chance at happiness. Either way, Marcus Hendricks had succeeded in his goal. He had found the weapon he needed to tear them apart, and he had wielded it with surgical precision. Inside Eli's house, the water rights certificate lay on the kitchen table, still looking official and ironclad. But both Clara and Eli now understood that legal documents were only as strong as the system meant to enforce them. And in Marcus Hendricks' territory, that system was corrupted by money and power. The battle for the ranch had taken a personal turn, and Clara was beginning to realize that her past would never stop haunting her as long as men like Hendricks existed to exploit it. The question was whether she had the strength to stand and fight, or whether the weight of Thomas's deception would finally break her spirit. Clara twisted her wedding ring around her finger, a gesture that had become unconscious over the months since Thomas's death. But tonight, sitting in her cabin with Hendricks' revelations echoing in her mind, the simple gold band felt like a shackle to a past built on deception. She had worn the ring faithfully since arriving at Eli's ranch, a symbol of her commitment to Thomas's memory. But now she wondered what she was really honoring. The man she thought she had married, or the desperate stranger who had gambled away their future in secret. A soft knock at her door interrupted her brooding. Eli stood on her doorstep, his hat in his hands, concern written across his weathered features. "May I come in?" he asked. Clara nodded, stepping aside to let him enter. They sat at her small table, the weight of unspoken words filling the space between them. "I've been thinking about what Hendricks said," Clara began. "About Thomas and the debt. And I keep asking myself how I could have been so blind. How could I live with a man for 6 years and not know he was capable of lying to me?" Eli reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "People do desperate things when they're backed into a corner. That doesn't mean he didn't love you. But it means he didn't trust me. He thought I was too weak to handle the truth. Or he thought he could fix it before you ever had to know." Clara pulled her hand away, standing to pace the small room. "I've been carrying his ring like some kind of sacred relic, honoring a marriage that might have been built on lies from the beginning." "Clara." "No, listen to me." She turned to face him, her eyes blazing. "I've been so afraid of betraying Thomas's memory that I've been betraying myself. Afraid to feel anything real for you, because I thought it would dishonor him." Eli stood slowly, understanding the gravity of what she was saying. "But what if I've been honoring a ghost?" Clara continued. "What if the man I thought I married never really existed?" She pulled the ring from her finger, holding it up to the lamplight. The gold caught the flame, throwing tiny reflections on the cabin walls. "I don't know who Thomas really was anymore," she said quietly. "But I know who I am. I know what I want." "What do you want?" Clara set the ring on the table with a soft click. "I want to stop running from the past and start building a future with you." Eli stepped closer, his eyes searching her face. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure that I love you. I'm sure that what we have is real, built on truth and trust and shared struggle. That's more than I ever had with Thomas, even if I didn't know it at the time." When Eli kissed her this time, there was no hesitation, no guilt holding her back. Clara felt free in a way she hadn't since before Thomas's death, free to love again, free to choose her own path. "I'm not leaving," she said against his lips. "Whatever Hendricks threatens, whatever he reveals about Thomas, I'm staying. Even if it costs us everything." Even then, they made love that night with the desperate passion of people who had found each other against impossible odds. Afterward, as they lay entwined on Clara's narrow bed, she felt a peace that had nothing to do with the battles they faced, and everything to do with the man holding her in his arms. "Tell me about your family," she said, tracing patterns on his chest. "I want to know about Sarah and the children." Eli was quiet for so long that Clara thought he might not answer. Then he began to speak, his voice soft in the darkness. "Sarah was a teacher, like I said. She had this way of making even the most difficult children feel special. Emma was just like her, patient and kind, always reading stories to James. And James was pure energy, always running, always asking questions. He wanted to be a sheriff like his papa." Eli's voice caught slightly. I used to take him on patrol sometimes, let him wear my badge. Clara pressed a kiss to his shoulder. They would want you to be happy. I know. Sarah used to say that love multiplies rather than divides, that caring for someone new doesn't take away from what you felt before. Smart woman. She was. She would have liked you. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Ruth Morrison arrived at dawn, her face pale with worry. There's been trouble in town, she said without preamble. Hendrick's men ransacked the land office last night, took some documents, destroyed others. Clara felt her blood turn to ice. Which documents? We don't know for sure, but the clerk thinks they targeted anything related to water rights claims. Eli and Clara exchanged glances. Without the supporting documentation from the land office, their legal case would be much weaker. There's more, Ruth continued. Judge Morrison has been replaced. Replaced? Clara asked. Territorial governor appointed a new judge to hear land disputes. Judge Blackwood from Denver. Word is he's very friendly to business interests. The message was clear. Hendricks had not only destroyed evidence that supported their case, he had arranged for a sympathetic judge to hear it. The legal system they had counted on to protect them had been compromised. He's rigged the game, Clara said after Ruth left. Then we need to change the rules. Over the next few days, Clara and Eli worked frantically to gather new evidence and build alternative strategies. Clara rode to every ranch in the valley, documenting the pattern of Hendrick's acquisitions and the suspicious circumstances surrounding each forced sale. What she discovered was even worse than she had imagined. Hendricks hadn't just been buying up ranches, had been systematically destroying the economic foundation of the entire region. Suppliers who refused to cooperate with his schemes found their businesses failing. Banks that didn't support his land acquisitions faced regulatory challenges. Even the territorial militia had received funding from Hendrick's companies. He owns everything, Clara told Eli as they reviewed her findings. The judge, the banks, the suppliers, maybe even the sheriff. Not everything, Eli said grimly. He doesn't own us. What can two people do against all that power? I don't know yet, but I know we're not giving up. That evening, as Clara sat writing letters to territorial officials and newspaper editors, she found herself thinking about the choice Hendricks had forced on her. She could run, disappear into the vast territory, and start over somewhere else. It would be easier, safer, smarter. But as she looked around her cabinet, the beautiful sewing box Eli had made for her, at the wildflowers on her table, at the evidence of the life they were building together, she knew she couldn't leave. Not again. She was tired of running, tired of letting powerful men dictate the terms of her existence. Thomas had made his choices, good and bad, and she had paid the price for his deception. But she wouldn't pay that price forever. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it, to find Eli holding a small wrapped package. "What's this?" she asked. "Something I made for you." Clara unwrapped the package to reveal a delicate wooden pendant carved in the shape of a horse. It was suspended from a simple leather cord, beautiful in its simplicity. "It's lovely," she said, genuinely moved. "I started carving again," Eli said. "After you came. It felt right somehow." Clara fastened the cord around her neck, feeling the weight of the pendant against her chest. "Thank you. I wanted you to have something that was just ours, something not connected to the past." As Clara looked at herself in the small mirror above her washstand, she saw a woman transformed. The desperate widow who had arrived at Eli's gate 2 months ago was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more determined. The wooden horse pendant lay against her throat like a promissoire symbol of new beginnings and the courage to fight for them. Outside, the Wyoming wind carried the scent of approaching winter. The legal battle with Hendricks would come to a head soon, and Clara knew that the outcome would determine not just their future, but the future of everyone in the valley. But tonight, wearing Eli's gift and surrounded by evidence of the life they were building together, Clara felt ready for whatever came next. She had found her strength, her purpose, and her heart. Marcus Hendricks could threaten her past, but he couldn't touch what she and Eli were creating together. The wedding ring lay forgotten on her table, a symbol of a marriage built on secrets and deception. But around her neck hung a promise of something different: love, built on truth, trust, and the shared determination to create something beautiful in a harsh world. Clara Whitmore was no longer running from her past. She was running toward her future, and she was running with a man who had taught her that love, like the finest wood carving, was created through patience, skill, and the willingness to see beauty in the raw material of a broken heart. The confession letter was hidden in the most unlikely place, tucked inside a hollowed-out copy of Principles of Modern Agriculture on Marcus Hendrick's personal bookshelf. Clara discovered it by pure accident while searching his study for evidence of his land manipulation schemes. She had broken into Hendrick's house in Clearwater during the town's harvest festival, when she knew he would be occupied with public appearances and social obligations. The risk was enormous, but their legal options had dwindled to almost nothing. If they were going to find evidence of Hendrick's corruption, it would have to be in his private papers. The letter was written in Hendrick's own hand, dated 3 years earlier, and addressed to his business partner in Denver. As Clara read the carefully formed words by lamplight, her blood turned to ice. The Colorado operation proceeded exactly as planned, the letter began. Sheriff Dawson's interference in our Millfield acquisition made it necessary to eliminate the obstacle permanently. The range war provided perfect cover for targeted elimination of his family. With Dawson broken and removed from office, we were able to complete the purchase of all disputed properties in the district. Clara's hands shook as she continued reading. The letter detailed how Hendricks had orchestrated the violence that killed Eli's wife and children, not as random casualties of a range war, but as deliberate targets in a campaign to destroy the one man who stood between Hendricks and his land consolidation scheme. Sheriff Dawson was incorruptible, the letter continued, and his investigation into our business practices threatened to expose the entire network. The attack on his family served dual purposes, removing him from office and sending a clear message to other potential obstacles. The final paragraph made Clara's stomach lurch. Similar tactics will be employed in Wyoming territory as needed. The Dawson problem is permanently resolved, and I expect no further interference with our expansion plans. Clara carefully photographed the letter with a small camera she had borrowed from the town doctor, then replaced it exactly as she had found it. As she prepared to leave Hendrick's study, she noticed other documents on his desk, including a telegram dated just 3 days earlier. The telegram was from Judge Blackwood, the new territorial judge assigned to hear their case. It contained a single damning line: "Dawson case will be resolved as discussed. Payment arrangements confirmed." Clara felt sick as the full scope of Hendrick's corruption became clear. He hadn't just rigged their legal case, he had murdered Eli's family 3 years ago as part of a broader campaign of terror and intimidation. She made it back to the ranch just as the harvest festival was ending, her mind reeling from what she had discovered. Eli was waiting for her in the barn, and one look at her face told him that something terrible had happened. "What did you find?" he asked. Clara pulled out the photographs of the letter, her hands still trembling. "Eli, you need to sit down. Just tell me. Marcus Hendricks killed your family." The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Eli's face went white, then very still. "What are you talking about?" "It wasn't random violence. It wasn't wrong place, wrong time. Hendricks ordered their deaths because you were investigating his land schemes in Colorado." Clara handed him the photographs, watching his face as he read. With each line, Eli seemed to grow more distant, more dangerous. When he finished, he set the papers down with careful precision. "He targeted them," Eli said quietly. "He killed my wife and children to get me out of the way. Yes, and now he's here, trying to do the same thing to us." Clara nodded, afraid to speak. She had never seen Eli look like this, cold and lethal, like a man capable of terrible violence. "There's more," she said softly. "The judge hearing our case is bought and paid for. Hendricks has everything rigged." Eli stood and walked to the window, staring out at the hill where his family was buried. 3 years, he said. 3 years I've been blaming myself for not protecting them. You couldn't have known. I could have done something. I should have seen what Hendricks was capable of. Eli, this isn't your fault. He turned to look at her, and Clara saw something in his eyes that frightened her. It was the look of a man who had just discovered that his worst enemy was within reach. I need to tell you something, Eli said. Something I should have told you before. Clara felt her heart skip. What? I wasn't just a sheriff in Colorado. I was a U.S. Marshal before that. Federal law enforcement, investigating organized crime across the territories. Clara stared at him, pieces of a puzzle falling into place. That's why Hendricks saw you as such a threat. I had been tracking his network for 2 years before I took the sheriff job in Millfield. I thought I could investigate him better from a local position, build a case that would bring down his entire operation. And he found out. He must have. The range war was the perfect cover to eliminate me and my family while making it look like random violence. Clara felt the weight of this revelation settling over her. Eli wasn't just a gentle rancher who had lost his family to senseless violence. He was a trained lawman who had been hunting Marcus Hendricks for years. What happened to your investigation? I destroyed all the evidence after the funeral. I was broken, blamed myself for putting my family in danger. I thought if I disappeared, if I stopped being a threat, maybe I could live in peace. But you can't live in peace while he's still out there. Eli looked at her with eyes that seemed older, harder. No, I can't. Over the next hour, Clara learned about the man she thought she knew. Eli had spent 15 years in federal law enforcement, tracking criminals across the frontier. He had been one of the most effective marshals in the territory, known for his methodical approach and his ability to build airtight cases. I gave it all up after Sarah and the children died, he said. Turned in my badge, burned my files, tried to become someone else. But you're still a marshal. Technically, yes. Federal appointments don't expire unless formally revoked. Clara felt a mix of awe and fear as she looked at this man she was falling in love with. He wasn't just a gentle rancher, he was a weapon that Hendricks had tried to destroy and thought he had succeeded. What are you going to do? I'm going to finish what I started 3 years ago. I'm going to bring Marcus Hendricks to justice. The legal system is corrupted. He owns the judge. Then we'll bypass the legal system. Federal marshals have authority that supersedes territorial courts. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. You're talking about taking the law into your own hands. I'm talking about enforcing federal law when local authorities have been compromised. As they talked through the night, Clara began to understand the scope of what Eli was proposing. He wanted to use his federal authority to arrest Hendricks and his associates, bypassing the corrupted territorial system entirely. It's dangerous, she said. He has men, guns, money. So do I, and now I have something he doesn't. What's that? The truth, and a partner who's brave enough to help me expose it. Clara looked at the photographs of Hendricks' confession letter, then at the man sitting across from her. Everything had changed in the space of a few hours. They were no longer desperate ranchers fighting a hopeless legal battle. They were federal law enforcement pursuing a criminal who had evaded justice for too long. What do you need me to do? Help me contact my old partners in Denver. Help me build a case that will hold up in federal court. Help me make sure Marcus Hendricks pays for what he's done. Clara thought about the gentle cowboy who had given her shelter when she had nowhere else to go. He was still there, she realized, but underneath was something harder, more determined. She was seeing the man he had been before grief and guilt had broken him. Are you sure about this? She asked. Once we start down this path, there's no going back. I've been hiding from this fight for 3 years, Eli said. I'm done hiding. Clara nodded, understanding that their quiet life together was about to end. They were going to war against one of the most powerful men in the territory, and the stakes couldn't be higher. There's something else, Eli said, his voice growing even more serious. If we do this, if we go after Hendricks directly, he'll retaliate. He'll come after you the way he came after my family. I know. I couldn't bear to lose you the way I lost them. Clara reached across the table and took his hands. You won't lose me. We're stronger together than either of us is alone. Are you sure? I'm sure that I'd rather die fighting alongside you than live running from the truth. As dawn broke over the Wyoming prairie, Clara and Eli sat together in the growing light, planning their campaign against Marcus Hendricks. The confession letter lay between them, proof of crimes that demanded justice. Clara thought about the woman she had been when she arrived at this ranch desperate, broken, running from a past she couldn't control. Now she was preparing to face the most dangerous man in the territory, armed with nothing but the truth and her love for a man who had finally remembered who he was meant to be. The gentle cowboy and the desperate widow were gone, replaced by a federal marshal and his partner, ready to bring justice to a corrupt system that had failed too many innocent people. Marcus Hendricks had made one crucial mistake. In trying to destroy Eli Dawson, he had created an enemy far more dangerous than a small-town sheriff. He had awakened a federal marshal who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The real battle was about to begin. Eli's federal marshal badge was tarnished with age, but still carried the weight of absolute authority. Clara watched him pin it to his vest, with hands that shook slightly not from fear, but from the enormity of putting it on again after 3 years of self-imposed exile from the law. It feels strange, he admitted, adjusting the badge until it sat properly. I thought I'd never wear this again. How does it feel now? Like coming home, like remembering who I was before grief made me forget. They had spent the past week in intense preparation, transforming Eli's ranch from a peaceful homestead into a command center for federal law enforcement. Telegraph messages flew between the ranch and Denver as Eli contacted his former colleagues and built a case that would hold up in federal court. The response from his old partners had been immediate and overwhelming. U.S. Marshal Thomas Craig arrived from Denver with 2 deputies and a warrant for Marcus Hendricks' arrest on federal charges of conspiracy, murder, and corruption of territorial officials. Eli Dawson, Craig said as he dismounted in the ranch yard. I wondered if we'd ever see you again. Tom, Eli shook his old friend's hand. Thanks for coming. Are you kidding? We've been after Hendricks for 5 years. Your evidence is exactly what we needed to bring him down. Clara felt a surge of pride as she watched Eli take charge of the operation. This was the man he had been before. Tragedy broke him confident, methodical, absolutely committed to justice. The gentle cowboy was still there, but underneath was the steel of a lawman who had dedicated his life to protecting the innocent. What's our timeline? Eli asked, as they gathered around the kitchen table that had become their planning headquarters. Federal judge is standing by in Cheyenne, Craig replied. We have warrants for Hendricks and 6 of his associates. The plan is to coordinate arrests across 3 territories simultaneously. And the local authorities? We're bypassing them entirely. Too much corruption to risk it. Clara studied the detailed plans they had developed. The operation would require precision timing and absolute secrecy. If Hendricks learned they were coming, he would disappear into the maze of properties and shell companies he controlled across the West. What about me? Clara asked. Where do I fit in this? Eli looked at her with concern. You don't. This is too dangerous. Like hell, Clara said firmly. I found that confession letter. I documented his pattern of corruption. I'm part of this team. Craig looked between them with amusement. I can see why you fell for her, Eli. She's got backbone. She's also the most important witness we have, Eli admitted reluctantly. Her testimony about the systematic targeting of ranchers is crucial to proving the pattern. Then I'm staying, Clara said. Besides, who knows Hendricks' tactics better than someone who's been his victim? That evening, as Clara sat cleaning her late husband's rifle skill Thomas had insisted she learned during their years on the Nebraska farm, she reflected on how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been a desperate widow with nothing to lose. Now she was preparing to help bring down one of the most dangerous criminals in the territory. Eli found her on the porch, the rifle across her knees as she worked. You don't have to do this, he said, sitting beside her. Yes, I do. This man destroyed my first life and tried to destroy my second. I won't let him hurt anyone else. I'm scared of losing you. Clara looked at him with steady eyes. Then we'd better make sure we win. The next morning brought news that changed their timeline dramatically. A messenger arrived with word that Judge Blackwood had moved up their court date, clearly trying to rush through a judgment before federal authorities could intervene. "He knows something," Craig said grimly. "We need to move tonight." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. While Hendricks attended a political dinner in Clearwater, a public event where he would be surrounded by witnesses, federal marshals would simultaneously arrest his key associates and seize his business records. By the time he realized what was happening, his entire network would be in custody. Clara's role was to provide intelligence about Hendricks' house and office, which she had scouted during her previous reconnaissance. She knew the layout, the security routines, the best points of entry. "Remember," Eli told her as they prepared to leave the ranch, "we're federal law enforcement now. This isn't vigilante justice, it's the rule of law finally reaching a place where corruption thought it was safe. And if Hendricks resists, then we'll be ready for that too." As the sun set over the Wyoming prairie, Clara felt the weight of everything they were risking. If their operation failed, Hendricks would destroy them both. If it succeeded, they would have brought justice to a man who had caused immeasurable suffering. But as she looked at Eli, confident and determined in his marshal's badge, knew they were doing the right thing. Sometimes justice required ordinary people to stand up and fight, even when the odds seemed impossible. The ride to Clearwater was tense, but purposeful. Craig and his deputies took the lead, while Eli and Clara followed with the evidence that would seal Hendricks' fate. The confession letter, the documented pattern of corruption, the testimony of his victims, everything they needed to ensure that Marcus Hendricks would never hurt another family. "Whatever happens tonight," Clara said to Eli as they neared the town, "I want you to know that these past months with you have been the happiest of my life, even with all the danger and uncertainty. Especially because of it. You taught me that love isn't about safety, it's about finding someone worth fighting for." As they entered Clearwater, Clara could see the lights of the hotel where Hendricks was attending his political dinner. In a few hours, he would discover that his empire of corruption was crumbling around him. The desperate widow who had begged for work at Eli's gate was gone forever, replaced by a woman who understood her own strength and wasn't afraid to use it. Tonight, Clara Whitmore would help bring down the man who had destroyed so many lives. The final confrontation with Marcus Hendricks was about to begin, and Clara was ready for whatever came next. She had found her courage, her purpose, and her heart. Nothing would make her run again. The battle for justice, for love, and for the right to build a life free from fear was reaching its climax. And Clara intended to be standing when the dust settled, hand in hand with the man who had taught her that sometimes the greatest strength comes from learning to trust again. Tomorrow would bring either triumph or disaster. But tonight, riding through the darkness toward a confrontation that would determine their future, Clara felt no fear in Lee, the calm certainty that they were finally going to set things right. Marcus Hendricks had built his power on the suffering of others. It was time for him to learn that some debts could never be escaped, and some justice could never be bought. The church bell in Clearwater's town square had never been used to summon the entire community for anything other than Sunday service or emergency fire calls. But when Clara climbed the bell tower at precisely 8 o'clock that evening and began pulling the rope with steady, determined strokes, the bronze voice carried a different message across the valley. It was the signal they had agreed upon the call that would bring every rancher, shopkeeper, and settler within 20 miles to witness the confrontation that would determine the future of their community. Below in the town square, Marcus Hendricks stood on the hotel's front steps, his face flushed with anger as he realized his carefully orchestrated political dinner had been interrupted by something he couldn't control. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded as Marshal Craig approached with federal warrants in hand. "Marcus Hendricks," Craig announced in a voice that carried across the gathering crowd, "you are under arrest by order of the Federal District Court of Colorado Territory for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and corruption of territorial officials." Clara watched from the bell tower as Hendricks' carefully constructed facade began to crumble. For the first time since she had known him, the powerful land baron looked uncertain, caught off guard by an enemy he hadn't seen coming. "This is preposterous," Hendricks sputtered. "I have done nothing wrong. Sheriff Williams, arrest these men for disturbing the peace." But Sheriff Williams stood frozen, clearly torn between his loyalty to Hendricks and the reality of federal authority. The badges on Craig's coat were unmistakable, as was the document he held. "The sheriff has no authority in federal matters," Eli said, stepping forward. His own marshal's badge caught the lamplight as he moved. "And neither do you." The crowd gasped as they recognized Eli, quiet rancher who had kept to himself for 3 years, was now revealed as a federal law enforcement officer. Clara could see the shock ripple through the assembled townspeople. "Eli Dawson," Hendricks said, his voice dripping with venom. "I should have known you couldn't stay buried. You tried hard enough to bury me, just like you buried my wife and children." Another gasp from the crowd. Clara began climbing down from the bell tower, knowing it was time for her part in the confrontation. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Hendricks said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Don't you?" Clara emerged from the church, carrying a leather satchel. "Because I have your confession right here." She pulled out the photographs of Hendricks' letter, holding them up for the crowd to see. "Written in your own hand, detailing how you ordered the murder of Marshal Dawson's family to eliminate his investigation into your criminal activities." "Those documents are forgeries," Hendricks declared, but his face had gone pale. "Then you won't mind if we have a handwriting expert examine them," Craig said smoothly. "Along with all the other documents we seized from your office an hour ago." The color drained from Hendricks' face completely. "You had no right." "We had every right. Federal warrant, signed by Judge Harrison in Denver." Craig held up another document. "We also have warrants for your associates in 3 territories. By now, your entire network is in custody." Clara watched as the full scope of their operation became clear to Hendricks. This wasn't a simple arrest, it was the complete dismantling of his criminal empire. "You people don't understand," Hendricks said, his voice rising. "I brought progress to this territory. I created jobs, built infrastructure." "You destroyed families," Clara interrupted, stepping closer. "You stole land through fraud and violence. You corrupted officials and murdered innocent people." "Mrs. Whitmore speaks from experience," Eli added, "since you also destroyed her first family through your Nebraska operations." The crowd turned to look at Clara with new understanding. Many of them had heard whispers about her past, but now they were learning the truth about what had driven her to Eli's ranch. "This woman is a liar," Hendricks declared desperately. "Her husband was a debtor and a cheat." "My husband was your victim," Clara said firmly, "just like every other family you've destroyed, but I'm not a victim anymore." Clara opened her satchel and began pulling out documents, the testimony she had gathered from displaced families, the evidence of systematic corruption, the proof of Hendricks' pattern of criminal behavior. "I spent weeks documenting what you've done," she continued, "talking to families you've ruined, tracing the connections between your various schemes. You're not a businessman, Mr. Hendricks. You're a criminal who uses legal loopholes to hide behind." "She's right," called out a voice from the crowd. Clara turned to see Henry Morrison stepping forward. "My brother lost his ranch to Hendricks 2 years ago. Same tactics trumped, up legal challenges, economic pressure, threats." "My family too," added another voice. Soon, a chorus of townspeople were sharing their own stories of Hendricks' predatory behavior. Clara felt a surge of vindication as she watched the community finally unite against their oppressor. This was what she had hoped for, not just justice for Eli's family, but accountability for all of Hendricks' victims. Judge Harrison's gavel fell with the finality of thunder, its sound echoing through the packed federal courthouse in Cheyenne. The trial had lasted 3 days, but Clara knew the outcome had been determined the moment they presented Hendricks' confession letter and the mountain of corroborating evidence they had gathered. "Marcus Hendricks," Judge Harrison announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "This court finds you guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, corruption of public officials, and racketeering. You are hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison." Clara felt Eli's hand squeeze hers as they sat in the gallery, watching justice finally prevail. Around them, the families that Hendricks had victimized wept with relief. Some had traveled hundreds of miles to witness this moment. Furthermore, the judge continued, all properties and assets acquired through criminal enterprise are to be returned to their rightful owners or sold to compensate victims. It was more than Clara had dared hope for. Not only would Hendricks pay for his crimes, but the families he had destroyed would have a chance to rebuild their lives. As federal marshals led Hendricks away in shackles, he turned one last time to look at Clara and Eli. His face was twisted with rage and defeat. "This isn't over," he snarled. "I have friends, connections." "Not anymore," Eli replied calmly. "Your network is finished. Your associates are in prison. Your corruption ends today." Clara watched Hendricks disappear through the courthouse doors, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders that she had carried for more than a year. The man who had destroyed her first life and threatened her second was finally facing the consequences of his actions. Outside the courthouse, the celebration was subdued but deeply felt. Clara found herself surrounded by other survivors of Hendricks' schemes, people who had lost farms, businesses, and loved ones to his criminal enterprise. "Thank you," said Mary Patterson, an elderly woman whose son had been killed in one of Hendricks' orchestrated range wars. "I never thought I'd live to see justice done." "We all did this together," Clara replied. "None of us could have stopped him alone." Eli approached with Marshal Craig, both men looking satisfied but exhausted. The past week had been a whirlwind of testimony, evidence presentation, and legal proceedings. "What happens now?" Clara asked. "Now we go home," Eli said simply. "We go back to our ranch and build the life we've been fighting for." "Your ranch," Craig corrected with a smile. "The federal court has confirmed your complete ownership of the property. All of Hendricks' challenges have been dismissed." Clara felt tears of relief spring to her eyes. After months of uncertainty, they finally had legal security for their future together. As they prepared to leave Cheyenne, Clara reflected on how much had changed since that desperate morning when she had arrived at Eli's gate. She had been a broken woman then, carrying nothing but grief and shame. Now she stood as a federal witness who had helped bring down one of the territory's most dangerous criminals. "I'm proud of you," Eli said as they boarded the train back to Wyoming. "You found the courage to stand up to a man who had already destroyed your life once." "I found the courage to stop running," Clara corrected. "There's a difference." The journey home gave them time to process everything that had happened. Clara watched the familiar landscape roll past the train windows, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. "What will you do now?" she asked Eli. "Will you go back to being a marshal?" "I've been thinking about that. Craig offered me a position with the Territorial Marshal Service, but I like being a rancher. I like the quiet life we've built together. Maybe it's time for someone else to chase the criminals." Clara smiled, understanding his choice. They had both seen enough violence and corruption to last a lifetime. The idea of a peaceful future on their ranch held more appeal than any amount of excitement or glory. When they arrived back in Clearwater, they found the entire town waiting to welcome them home. Word of the trial's outcome had reached the community, and people who had lived in fear of Hendricks for years were finally free to celebrate. "Looks like we're heroes," Eli observed as they stepped off the train to cheers and applause. "Looks like we're home," Clara replied. Ruth Morrison was the first to reach them, throwing her arms around Clara in an embrace that spoke of genuine affection and admiration. "You brave, wonderful girl," Ruth said through tears. "You saved us all." "We saved each other," Clara said, looking around at the faces of people who had become her community, her chosen family. That evening, as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and purple, Clara reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The desperate widow and the grieving rancher had become partners in the truest sense, just in love. But in the fight for justice, and the courage to build something beautiful from the ashes of their losses. "I have something for you," Eli said, reaching into his vest pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box and knelt beside her chair. Clara's heart stopped as she realized what was happening. "Clara Whitmore," Eli said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Will you marry me? Will you be my partner in whatever comes next?" Inside the box was a simple gold band, but Clara could see that it had been engraved with tiny carved horse, a reference to the pendant he had made for her, to the wooden horse that had belonged to his son, to the new life they were building together. "Yes," Clara whispered, then louder. "Yes, of course I will." As Eli slipped the ring onto her finger, Clara thought about the other ring she had worn for so long, Thomas's ring, which now rested in her jewelry box as a memory of a different kind of love. This ring represented something new, a love built on truth, trust, and the shared determination to create something lasting. "I love you," Eli said, kissing her hand. "I love you too, and I'm not going anywhere ever again." The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, each one a point of light in the vast darkness. Clara and Eli sat together on their porch, planning their wedding and their future, secure in the knowledge that they had fought for their happiness and won. Marcus Hendricks was in prison, his victims were finding justice, and two people who had lost everything had found each other. It was, Clara thought, the kind of ending that proved love could triumph over even the darkest circumstances. Clara's wedding dress was the most beautiful thing she had ever owned, and she hadn't bought it. The women of Clearwater had made it for her. Every stitch was sewn with love, every detail crafted with the care of a community that had watched her transform from a desperate stranger into one of their own. Ruth Morrison had organized the effort, but women from across the valley had contributed. The silk had come from the general store's finest stock, the lace from a traveling merchant who had offered it at cost when he heard the story. Even the buttons were special carved from mother of pearl by old Henrik the jeweler, each one a tiny work of art. "You look radiant," Ruth said as she helped Clara with the final touches. They were in the back room of the church, where Clara was preparing for the ceremony that would unite her life with Eli's forever. "I feel like I'm dreaming," Clara admitted, smoothing the soft fabric. 6 months ago, I had nothing. No home, no family, no hope. And now," Clara smiled, looking at herself in the small mirror. The woman reflected there was strong, confident, loved. "Now I have everything that matters." Outside, she could hear the sounds of the entire community gathering for the wedding. In the past months, as news of their victory over Hendricks had spread, Clara and Eli had become symbols of hope for people throughout the territory. Their story, the desperate widow and the broken marshal who had found love and justice together, had been told and retold until it had taken on an almost mythical quality. "Are you ready?" Ruth asked. Clara touched the wooden horse pendant at her throat, the one Eli had carved for her. It had become her talisman, a reminder of the man who had given her not just shelter, but a reason to believe in the future again. "I'm ready." The church was packed beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls and spilling out into the street. Clara had never imagined that so many people would want to witness her wedding, but she understood now that this ceremony represented more than just two people pledging their love. It represented the triumph of ordinary people over corruption and fear. As she walked down the aisle on Henry Morrison's arm, he had volunteered to give her away when she mentioned that she had no family present. Clara saw faces that had become dear to her. There was the Patterson family, whose ranch would be returned to them thanks to the court's restitution order. There was young Timothy Chen, whose father's business had been saved when Hendricks's economic stranglehold was broken. And there, at the altar in his best suit with his marshal's badge pinned proudly to his chest, was Eli. He looked handsome and confident, but Clara could see the emotion in his eyes as he watched her approach. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Williams began, his voice carrying easily through the packed church. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Eli Dawson and Clara Whitmore. Two souls who have found in each other the strength to overcome adversity and the courage to build a new life together. As they exchanged vows, Clara thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. She had arrived at Eli's ranch, carrying nothing but a small bundle and a desperate plea for work. Now she stood as his equal partner, his chosen companion, his wife. "I promise to stand with you through whatever comes," Clara said, looking into Eli's eyes. "To be your partner in joy and in struggle, to help you build something lasting and beautiful. I promise to love you with the kind of love that grows stronger through adversity." Eli replied, "To be worthy of the trust you've placed in me, and to never forget that the greatest strength comes from two people choosing to face the world together." When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in cheers that could be heard for miles. As Eli kissed her, Clara felt complete in a way she had never experienced before, not just loved, but truly known and accepted. The celebration continued late into the evening, with music and dancing in the town square. Clara and Eli were the center of attention, but they were also surrounded by the community that had embraced them and supported their fight for justice. "Speech!" someone called out, and soon the entire crowd was chanting for Clara and Eli to address them. Eli helped Clara onto a wooden platform that had been constructed for the occasion. Looking out at the sea of friendly faces, Clara felt overwhelmed by gratitude. "6 months ago," she began, her voice carrying clearly in the still evening air, "I came to this valley with nothing but the clothes on my back and a desperate hope that someone might give me a chance. I was running from a past I couldn't change, carrying shame that wasn't mine to bear." The crowd listened intently, many of them knowing her story but wanting to hear her tell it herself. "I found more than work at Eli's ranch," Clara continued. "I found a partner who saw strength in me that I didn't know I possessed. I found a community that welcomed a stranger and made her family, and I found the courage to stop running and start fighting for what's right." She looked at Eli, who was watching her with pride and love. "But most importantly, I learned that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead us exactly where we need to be. If I hadn't lost everything, I never would have found Eli. If we hadn't faced Marcus Hendricks together, we never would have discovered how strong we could be as partners." The crowd applauded, but Clara raised her hand for quiet. "So my advice to anyone who's facing hard times, who feels like they've lost everything and don't know how to go on, is this: keep walking, keep hoping. Keep believing that somewhere ahead is the life you're meant to live and the people you're meant to love, because sometimes the best chapters of our lives begin when we think the story is over." As the crowd erupted in cheers again, Clara felt Eli's arm around her waist, anchoring her to this moment, this place, this new life they were beginning together. Later, as they walked home to their ranch under a canopy of stars, Clara reflected on how different she felt from the woman who had stumbled through Eli's gate that desperate morning. "Any regrets?" Eli asked as they approached their house now, legally and emotionally. "Only one," Clara said. "What's that?" "I wish I could go back and tell that broken woman at your gate that everything was going to be all right, that the worst day of her life was actually the first day of the rest of her life." They stood on their porch, looking out at the land they had fought for and won. In the distance, Clara could see the hill where Eli's first family was buried, their graves now tended not just by a grieving widower, but by a couple who understood that honoring the past didn't mean being trapped by it. "What do you think comes next?" Clara asked. "I think we build something beautiful," Eli said. "We expand the ranch, maybe start a family of our own, help other people who are where we used to be." Clara smiled, liking the sound of that future. "I'd like to help other women who've lost everything, show them that starting over is possible. We'll do it together." As they went inside their homey, a place that now held hope instead of sorrow, love instead of loneliness, Clara thought about the wooden horse pendant around her neck, the wedding ring on her finger, the community that had embraced her, and the man who had taught her that love could bloom, even in the harshest soil. She had asked for work and been given a life. She had offered her labor and received love in return. The desperate widow who had begged for a chance to work the land had become a woman who owned that land, who had fought for it and won it, who would spend the rest of her life making it flourish. Sometimes, Clara thought as she fell asleep in her husband's arms, the most beautiful endings are actually the most beautiful beginnings. And sometimes the people who save us are the ones we meet when we think we're beyond saving. The story that had begun with a plea for mercy had become a testament to the power of love, courage, and the unshakable belief that everyone deserves a second chance at happiness. And in the quiet Wyoming night, surrounded by the sounds of the land she now called home, Clara Dawson knew that her real story was just beginning.